Hi everyone, I'm back to read the next Addie chapter in Happy Birthday Addie, a Springtime Story, Book 4 from 1864. And chapter 2 is called Sunshine. When Addie came home from school the next day, a small wagon loaded with furniture was in front of the tall boarding house. Boarders often moved in and out. Mr. and Mrs. Golden, who owned the boarding house, rented out 5 rooms, but Addie was the only child in the house. She looked carefully at the things in the wagon, hoping to see something belonging to a child, maybe a doll sticking out of a crate, but all she saw was furniture. Mr. Golden came out of the front room, and Addie thought that his name was perfect for him. His skin was golden brown. "Good afternoon to you, Addie. How are you today?" "Good afternoon, Mr. Golden," Addie said. "I'm doing fine. Who's moving in?" Mr. Golden sat down on the front steps and wiped his neck with a handkerchief. "By the looks of all this furniture, you'd think a family of 10 was moving in. But it's just one person, my mother." "Oh," Addie said, a little disappointed that she wouldn't be getting a playmate. "Would you like some help?" "No, but thank you kindly," Mr. Golden said. Getting up from the step, he went over to the wagon. Addie went up to her family's room on the second floor. She flopped onto her bed and reached for her doll, Ida Bean, who had been lying on her pillow. Addie loved Ida Bean. She could cuddle with Ida and tell her secrets, but even with Ida to keep her company, Addie still felt lonely during the long afternoons. All the adults in the boarding house were at work. Mrs. Golden was busy making supper for everyone and didn't want to be disturbed. Mama and Papa didn't get home until late. Sometimes they didn't even get home in time for the dinner Mrs. Golden served. On those days, Addie still joined the other boarders for supper in the dining room. This evening was one of those times. So when Mrs. Golden rang the bell, Addie went down to the dining room by herself. She took her place at one of the 2 tables. 4 other boarders sat at the table, but they didn't pay attention to Addie. They were talking about the trouble black people were facing on the streetcars. "Did you see today's paper?" Mrs. Golden asked. There was almost a riot on a streetcar downtown. 3 colored people were hurt. "I'm getting too scared to even ride the streetcars at all," one woman said. A man at the table joined in. "Well, I heard a conductor threw a colored man off the Pine Street streetcar and broke his leg. If they'd just let us sit inside, there wouldn't be all this trouble," another young woman at the table added. "That'll be the day," said Mr. Golden sourly. "I'll be an old man before I see that change come." Their talk scared Addie. The longer she listened, the less she was interested in her supper. She began playing with a napkin ring, and she only picked at the dinner of oxtail stew and mashed carrots. After dinner, Addie headed back to her room. She was halfway up the stairs when she heard a bird singing. Quietly, Addie tiptoed back down the stairs. The bird's beautiful song was like a trail that Addie followed down the narrow hall. The trail stopped at the open door of a room at the end. The room was unlit. The faint light from the hall was the only brightness in it. At first, Addie saw only her own shadow in the room, but as her eyes got used to the dimness, she saw a cage hanging before the window. In it was a small yellow bird, sitting on a perch, singing out happily. She stood at the door for a minute, enjoying its song. Suddenly, a woman's voice interrupted. "You can come in, child." Addie was so startled she jumped. She hadn't seen anyone in the darkened room. She moved a few steps inside. The woman lit a kerosene lamp, and Addie saw the furniture she had seen on the wagon earlier in the day. The woman sat in a high-backed rocker next to the cage. "Good evening, ma'am," Addie said. "I'm Addie Walker. Me and my mama and papa live upstairs." You Mr. Golden's mama?" "That's right," the woman answered. "Come on in and meet my bird, Sunny." Addie went over closer to the cage. It was then she saw the woman's eyes. The colored part of her eyes, The irises were covered with a cloudy whiteness. Addie stood staring at the woman. "Didn't know I was blind, did you?" Mrs. Golden asked. Addie answered quickly. "No, ma'am. If you blind, how did you know I was standing outside your door?" "I got plenty of ways of seeing," answered Mrs. Golden. "I heard your footsteps. They were soft as a whisper, and they were spaced close together, so I could tell you were a child." "How old are you, Addie?" Mrs. Golden asked. "When is your birthday?" "I'm 9, Addie said, "but I ain't sure about when my birthday is. I was born in the spring. My mama knows that much." Addie felt ashamed that she didn't know her birthday. Her seatmate at school, Harriet, knew when her birthday was. On that day, Harriet's mother had sent fancy raisin tarts for the whole class. "That's a shame you don't know your birthday," Mrs. Golden said. "Just listening to you talk, I think you were born into slavery." "Yes, ma'am," Addie said. "How did you know?" "Well, most slaves don't know their birthday," Mrs. Golden continued. "I was born right here in Philadelphia, but my parents were born into slavery over 100 years ago. I'm an old woman, you know. I was there the day God invented dirt." Addie looked at Mrs. Golden in disbelief. Mrs. Golden laughed so light and high, it made the room seem brighter. Addie joined in with her laughter. "You're real funny, ma'am," Addie said. "My brother Sam would like you. He like riddles and jokes." "Your brother?" Mrs. Golden said. "You didn't mention him. Does he live here too?" "No, ma'am," Addie explained sadly. "We don't know where Sam is. He might still be a slave, but he wanted to be a soldier. He and my papa were sold off the plantation, and then my mama and me ran away up here. We had to leave my baby sister Esther on the plantation when we left, but someday we're going to all be together again." "Slavery has taken a lot away from colored people," Mrs. Golden said. If we want to get some of it back, we're going to have to take it back. It's going to be some time before your family gets back together, but I know one thing you can take for yourself right now, Addie. Whenever you want, you can choose a special day and claim it for your birthday." Addie had never thought about this before. "That's a good idea," she exclaimed. "I want me a real special day. I want me a perfect day for my birthday. Now I've told you I've been around a long time. I never saw such a thing as a perfect day," Mrs. Golden said. "How about the day that God invented dirt?" Addie joked. No, Mrs. Golden said. "Even that wasn't perfect, but there is something special in every day." "How will I know what day is right for my birthday?" asked Addie. "You'll just know," answered Mrs. Golden. "And when that almost perfect day comes along, it'll be meant just for you." Now, the day God invented birds was extra special, close to perfect, and I was there for that too. Sonny seemed to understand what Mrs. Golden was saying, and he sang happily with his head cocked back and his breast puffed up. "Mrs. Golden, why your bird in that cage? It seems like he would be sad and lonesome in there all by himself," Addie said. Mrs. Golden closed her eyes for a moment before she answered. "I can tell you're a smart girl, but you think about things. I do think Sonny is lonely sometimes. I think I can hear it in his song. But we keep each other company. And when I hear him singing out from his soul, it brings sunshine into my life." Addie thought about that. "But he's still locked up." "Oh, child," answered Mrs. Golden, "that cage can't contain Sonny's spirit. It soars right out from behind those bars. That's what's important for all of us, to let our souls sing out." "Sometimes it's hard to do that, you know," Addie replied, "to let yourself sing out if you're feeling lonely or sad." "Sure is," Mrs. Golden said, looking right at her. "I'll tell you, Addie, when you first spoke to me tonight, I could hear a touch of loneliness in your voice. But even then, I could hear you singing out." Addie looked away from Mrs. Golden. Addie knew she was blind, but she felt like Mrs. Golden was looking deep inside of her. "Well, I better be going," Addie said. "I still have lessons to do, Mrs. Golden." "Don't be a stranger at my door now," Mrs. Golden said. "Come visit me in Sunny whenever you'd like. And one more thing, please call me M, dear. That's what my family calls me." "I will," replied Addie. "I will." All right, and that is the end of chapter 2, and next time we'll read chapter 3.